Welcome back. This is Ryder Richards on Let's Think About It. Personally, I don't want to read about sickness. Anything with the word hospital in it, and I'm out. Unless it's children's hospital or medical police, then I'm in. It's the same reason I don't like movies under the category drama. There's really already enough of it in the world, and I don't need to spend my spare time on it. But one of my favorite authors, Timothy Snyder, he wrote Our Malady, Lessons in Liberty from a Hospital Diary. And it says hospital in it, but I still had to read it. Now, this isn't a personal sob story. It's an extrapolation of life events to highlight societal issues. It follows the premise, make the political personal. The beginning premise is that health is tied to freedom. When you are ill, attached to bags and tubes and wires and pills, in the most literal way, you are not free. Snyder says, we are ill in a way that costs us our freedom, and unfree in a way that costs us our health. Now there's a freedom loop here. Our society is sick because it sacrifices our health, and our health is a measure of our freedom. So if we had that, we'd be more free, and then our society could be healthier. In this episode, Step 28, we're going to walk through 1. Snyder's history and his brush with medical disaster. 2. Healthcare is a human right, just like freedom or equality. And 3. The broken healthcare system. And we're going to finish on how a flawed healthcare system enables tyrants that take our freedom. Part 1. Rage. I think many philosophers and educators, and our society in general, prior to 2016, discounted rage. Of course, it was still there, but we had swept it under the carpet while cleaning out our societal bedroom. We just ignored it for mantras of civility. Fitter, happier, more productive, comfortable, not drinking too much, regular exercise at the gym, 3 days a week. To be angry was to be seen as unhealthy, thus it was not socially permissible. Similar to any time a society oppresses core human motivations, something such as sex, we find that both an underground economy arises and a twisted subconscious monster surfaces from the depths. Perhaps with tentacles, if we're talking about Japan. And maybe if it's Victorian Europe, we're talking about asylums. Now, Peter Sloterdijk, in his book Rage in Time, mentions how Lacan lumps eros, or sexuality, with the thymotic impulse, which is anger, fear, rage. And he sort of lumps them into desire as one thing. And while that's a whole different podcast we really need to tackle, we should remember that the Greeks saw rage as completely different than sexuality. It was a manifestation of the gods, because enough rage, it could possess and mobilize entire nations to war. Its cleansing focus made you pure, even terrifying. Snyder brings up feeling rage, lonely rage while lying in a hospital bed. And before COVID hit, he was in 3 hospitals. Each one misdiagnosed him or flat out ignored his desperate efforts to show them paperwork for previous hospital visits. Eventually, after nearly dying in an emergency room, after hours of neglect and incompetence, well, I think his rage is justified. Now, a bit about Snyder. Snyder is a historian at Yale specializing in Russia, Germany, and Eastern Europe, and he has a brilliant way of spotting the patterns that lead to authoritarian fascist movements, and he ends up being able to break them down into these really clear lessons. A book you should buy right now, On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. Oh wait, seriously, there's a link on my website. Just click on it. I'll make a few pennies, but you need to buy this and you need to read it. So my introduction to him, though, was The Road to Unfreedom. In this book, he shows how the anti-communist, nationalist, fascist philosopher Ivan Ilyin set up a playbook for how to take over the government and disassociate the populace from truth and relieve them of their freedoms. Oh, for their own good, of course. This allows for an authoritarian dictator, a larger-than-life, messianic character, to save the country and show them a way into the future. And of course, Putin followed this playbook, blatantly citing Ilyin while rigging elections and controlling the media. The lies are so big and so stupid that really truth or logic has no footing here. For instance, they say, Russia didn't attack the Ukraine attacked us. Yeah, that's what happened. They launched those missiles at themselves just to make us look like villains. We're the victims here. This post-truth battle for victimization establishes a politics of inevitability. And this is where people feel that nothing they can do can change anything. And the media keeps telling them how competent their government is, even though they can look around and only see misery. But by this point, these people aren't really sure what they can believe, or even what or who they would fight against. This sets up a politics of eternity. And once things are inevitable, people give up on change. Or they just say, I'm staying out of it. And it establishes an everlasting political system, an eternal system. And this is what Putin has done in Russia, and it's what Trump wanted to do here in America. One lying king for all time, the 1,000-year Reich. A politics of handing out pain now, and promises of more to come. The trend towards a politics of pain is dangerous. Punishing and alienating others is how it begins. Snyder says, our politics are too much about the curse of pain and too little about the blessings of liberty. By the way, Snyder predicted the Trump coup attempt back in October. How? He has studied this stuff, and the signs are there. But he asserts it isn't that history repeats itself, because that sounds like a politics of inevitability or eternity. And we know people can change, but patterns do emerge. And if we see them, they can be counteracted. This man has been showing them to us. So to find that this amazing, brilliant man nearly died of something as simple as a burst appendix due to systematic incompetence, well, then I started to feel rage. Snyder talks of the motivating quality of rage, to picture himself dead and rotting. Death would extinguish my sense of how things could and should be, of the possible and the beautiful. It was against that nothing that I raged. In his bed, with limited visiting hours weaving in and out of consciousness, people visited him. And he makes this insightful point that rage, while allowing you to see yourself and to motivate you, it should not lead you. But as Aristotle says of rage, one should only take it to be a comrade in arms. Health, to be healthy, is in many ways a matter of being together, moving from solidarity of friends and family back into solitude, being alone. But from that solidarity, you can return to a solitude of tranquility. And from these fluctuations, from rage and solitude to the solidarity of others allowing you to have tranquility, Snyder found another emotion growing: empathy. He realized his life was tied to others, generating a warmth and placing him back amongst these others. Part 2. Healthcare as a human right. Snyder says, the virus is not human, but a measure of humanity. The COVID pandemic. The handling was botched. In an all too predictable way, Snyder says it was dealing out pain and death rather than security and health. And it granted profit for a few rather than prosperity for many. When you look at our stats, from death count to the profiteering during COVID, well, our country's illness is actually quite easy to see. What's really alarming, though, is that smaller, poorer countries handled the pandemic better than us. We, of the US of A, repeatedly fail in our measure of humanity. Consider some of our other problems: opioid deaths, prisons, suicides, newborn deaths, and now we have mass graves for the elderly. We are paying more to live shorter, unhappier lives. Once again, other, smaller, poorer countries do it better than us. Here, in the land of the free, we are increasingly unable to pursue our values and desires, while our government, along with commercial medicine and insurance, tout freedom and choice. What we find is that our choice is actually quite limited, and the costs are exorbitant. We're becoming powerless, losing our ability to make meaningful decisions that could allow us to remain free and healthy. So by this, What I mean is, you don't have freedom of choice for your medical providers a lot of the time, or doctors in most cases, unless you are very wealthy. And when you do get sick, the costs can ruin you, even if you have insurance. And given the slipping numbers and the sort of incidence of malpractice, your lack of choice is really related to your life. It is your ability to pursue happiness and fulfill your goals. Once again, smaller, poorer countries do it better. Our healthcare system has somehow become decoupled from health, just as our Department of Corrections, once privatized, no longer corrects, it simply expands. Snyder warns this is the path where democracy becomes oligarchy. When money becomes the only goal, values disappear. There is a condition that has been created where a president can lie about a virus, and because we are isolated, we have outsourced our news to major distant networks. We have nowhere to turn. We have no local news or doctors or anybody we can trust. So we're confused when presented with lies from, of course, the highest positions of people we should trust whenever they're only acting out of self-interest. Without access to truth, or at least consistent facts, we become increasingly powerless, not knowing how to react or on whom we can rely. And in our isolated, vulnerable state, we are also unfree. Wait. How does this lack of truth leading to confused isolation make us unfree, Ryder? And what does this have to do with health? Well, most of us would agree that freedom is a human right, and to be free, to follow your desires and have your own virtues, you need to have a certain level of health. The chain of logic says that if health is necessary for freedom, and healthcare is necessary for health, well, that's simple logic. But using this A is needed for B, so C is necessary, well, this could be applied to other things, such as money. To be free, I need money. Yeah, okay, smarty pants. But without health, you can't do anything with your money or pursue your own interests. So let's get our basic rights in order first, and then we can check back on your allowance. So now, if we look at the history of tyrants and unfreedom, we see that rights are dismissed from citizens and hoarded for the ruling class. Snyder says to maintain a right, it must be forced upon the ruling class to validate it. A lack of truth and an abundance of lies, by isolating us, removes our ability to force the ruling class into validating our rights. And instead, it opens confusion and fear. There's no stability, and this leads to distraction during which they remove our rights, and often claiming it's for our own good and safety. Let me just help you stay safe by removing your right to privacy. It's not like you were using it anyway. Oh, and how about your soul? Are you using that? Oh, well, let me just take a quick peek. Nope, you're not using that either. I'll just go ahead and take that. Thank you. This slide into unfreedom starts with a lack of truth. A confusion on truth is a confusion of right and wrong, responsibility or justice. And suddenly, we're using different systems for how to value people, because the professed truth of all men are created equal is not really legit on the ground. So we start looking around for the real values that drive change. Money and prestige. Snyder says that after leaving the hospital, people told him he should have called in his powerful friends to get him better attention. And he says, if the system does work that way, it should not. Knowing our lives may depend on status and wealth, because preferential treatment is the only way to get good care, this leads us to feel anxious and disenfranchised, precarious. And of course, it makes racism very, very dangerous. Remember, when profit is valued over human rights, we move from democracy into oligarchy. And the ruling class hoards the rights once meant for everybody. And this has turned health and healthcare in our country into a privilege. Part 3. The system. We pay a huge premium for the privilege of dying younger. While Snyder points out several flaws of doctors and nurses, he doesn't necessarily blame them. They are, of course, caught in a system, a machine of protocols, getting between the patient and the doctor. When your job requirement is checking boxes on a clipboard rather than actually pausing and being attentive to your patient, rather than listening because, of course, you have 15 patients to see in the next hour, you basically go along pacifying electronic alerts rather than giving attention. And of course, the administrative bureaucratic tasks, not the health-driven ones, are what actually drives your performance. You can see here a factory mindset at play. Efficiency demands beds be turned over quickly, even if the patient's still in them. Oops, out you go, buddy. And we're going to need that gown back, too. And of course, now we outpatient everything possible. Let's get 300 more through here by the end of the day. Recovery schmacovery. And of course, following the scribblings on that clipboard over the protestations of the patient, shh, don't make me use the duct tape again. This is because healthcare is competitive. They say healthy competition makes everyone stronger, but I find it actually makes people meaner and cheatier. Practices that require attentive personal consideration, such as education and physical or mental health, these cannot be industrialized, and to do so strips them of their humanity, and obviously the results suffer, even if profit increases. Now, on the inside of healthcare, now turned Control Corp, we find the mistakes we learned about in our podcasts on moral mazes. Corporations have their own desires, and corporate men's only loyalty is to the company. Having remade themselves, moral qualms are detrimental to thriving. Instead, we spread blame and responsibility across the bureaucratic quagmire, relying on good appearances and provisional language, helped out, of course, by a cutthroat marketing team. All this to help us reach quarterly profits. The doctors and nurses also seem to hate this system. But to push back, just like in any corporate job, is to be labeled as not a team player. Or you end up getting fired through bureaucracy's malicious compliance. It is the unfortunate system of employees who actually care, but they're getting overworked and gagged by red tape. Okay, so let's take a pause and a left turn for a second. Now, I picked up most of this from Stephen West's Philosophize This podcast, but he talks about Henry Bergson and laughter. This is a philosopher born in the 1850s, and he took a look at what makes things humorous. Now, people say laughter is a relief valve, or maybe it's two incongruous things that bump into each other, or it's a shock. But these aren't all true all the time or in every case. What he came up with was that laughter stemmed from the mechanical encrusted upon the living, which is to say, when we slip into planning, thinking, or conceptualizing, we're behaving like a machine, and we've lost touch with the supple living soul, or what it means to be human rather than an automaton. The moment of laughter stems from our recognition that we have lost touch with the reality of being human. Now, I would like to extend this insight to pain and rage as well. The rage and injustice felt by Snyder when trying to convey facts that would keep him alive, and of course being ignored and told, that's not the way we do it here. This is now built into our medical system, and it's so common that it must be a feature, right? Not a bug. The patient is reduced into a cog, the workers have become automatons, and suffering is the result. The mechanical is encrusted upon the living. And really, it's quite funny, right? Because we made and participate in the system that destroys us. It's a black comedy, of course. I mean, it's so dark it eclipses tragedy.
Term, fitter, healthier.
So what's the solution? Snyder offers anecdotes of Austrian healthcare, where doctors are attentive and holistic and probably too chatty and downright prying. And that's because they're treating a person as much as a symptom. They're looking for the cause. To return to smaller systems of doctors and caretakers, where it's a calling instead of a churning bureaucracy by hamstringing medical workers from exercising their own judgment, well, that would provide relief for both doctors and patients. Part 4: Politics and Society. So, quick recap here. Snyder, of course, studies history. We've talked about healthcare being a right tied to your freedom because it provides security, so you're not making decisions based off of fear and pain. Now, when you don't have health or truth, It opens a road for authoritarians to take power. Snyder brings up that America, after World War II, helped Japan and Germany establish health as a protected right. And of course, now their citizens are more healthy than ours. In America, we seem to have a death wish. We remain silent, full of rage with all of our pains. As a culture, we work through the pain. We deny solidarity in order to be a self-made man who stands on his own 2 feet. And we remain in solitude with our suffering. It's cultural to accept that life is pain. To admit weakness somehow makes you lesser. You're diminished in appearance and prestige. You lose dignity and honor. I mean, it's as if we're still in Sparta. And hence, we have a silent epidemic of opioid addiction. Now let's map out what that looks like. How do strong people, crippled with pain, get stuck in rage and solitude? Well, to start, do you know what opioids do beyond the obvious? I mean, I didn't know. They cloud our mind, not letting us properly connect with others, isolating us in a fortress of solitude, which reduces our empathy. But also, to be an addict? Well, that's a cultural stigma. It's seen as a lack of self-discipline or strength, which further alienates the proud. Remember, in our Tyranny of Meritocracy episode, where Michael Sandel showed that the demographic voting for Trump was the undereducated, Snyder cites that the best predictor for Trump votes actually comes from the degree to which the community is racked by opioid abuse. Now, if we want to pair both of those up, we have pain and addiction. Now, if we pair those two up, we have pain and addiction, along with a lack of education, often seen as a demoralizing lack of prospect, and an inability to have a future in our society. And this leads to increased isolation and solitude. These criteria predict who will vote for a liar who traffics in pain. These are, as Snyder says, votes of desperation. And these are similar to our deaths of despair. Now, deaths of despair, as mentioned in earlier podcasts, are where middle-aged white men are killing themselves in unprecedented numbers. It is said this is due to a slowly changing way of life to which they cannot adapt. Similarly, votes of despair come from people who cannot find a future in our society. Snyder speaks of the small-town farmers and the demolishing of the American dream, saying, "The welfare state, meant to complement the solitude of ambition with the solidarity of support, has been taken apart." Singularly, we are isolated, we're weak, and alone. We become powerless. And this isolated condition lets us be taken advantage of. Snyder says, "The downward spiral from pain to desperation, from pride to resentment, is something politicians like Mr. Trump understand and accelerate." So first, we're staggered by suffering. Then they tell us we're too proud to need insurance or public health. They flatter us while denying care, harming while grinning, hoarding health for themselves. And once again, this is sadism. Our lack of economic or social stability, much less mobility, has become unfortunately paired with our need, yet of course profound distrust, for healthcare. This is not freedom. This is a trap. And the anxiety of knowing that you're cornered leads to stress, unhealth, and desperation. When we are sick, undereducated, unemployed, we don't see a future. And in the land of opportunity, where all you have to do is pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, it's hard to see how you fit into the society or are of value to it at all. And from this dark place, along comes a politician, peddling pain, showing you self-interest and bullying and feeding your rage. This politician extends a hand of faux solidarity. "You are one of us. Hate with us. Break with us. Your pain is useful." And of course, this works on the right and the left. But even if we know the truth is absent, we choose ignorance and plausible deniability. Now, why do we do this? As Jonathan Haidt says, when asked the question, "Do I have to believe this?" as in, do I have to believe Elvis is dead? The answer for people is always no. You only believe what you want, and thus we skip the really hard work of finding truth through an abundance of facts. Instead, we take the easy death slope of excusing yourself later. You just say, "How could we have known that these were lies and that it would lead to this?" But of course, these decisions are made by a scared, suffering, precarious population who can see no future in which they matter, clouded by pills, fed lies, and full of rage. We have created an isolated society where post-truth thrives. A politics of victimization and inevitability ensues. To combat it, we need the stability of health so that people know they can make decisions from virtues beyond rage, fear, hopelessness, and survival. And we must push for truth in all things. Since the truth sets you free, the people who oppress you resist the truth. All right, thank you for listening. Snyder is a fantastic writer, and in this short text, he maps out how our government failed miserably with COVID, and he offers some insights and solutions. But one of the overarching points is that the right policies make us more free by making us more secure. This helps citizens, and a more secure populace won't be so enamored with politicians who want to break or game the system. If you enjoyed the content, please rate and review us on iTunes or whichever platform you use. Next week, I'm going to be covering William James' pragmatism with my friend Elle. Until then, stay safe.